Good day, dear friends, and welcome to this webinar that is being organized by GAWI, the Global African Workers Institute, and being co by ITUC Africa, that is the African Regional Organization of the International Trade Union Confederation, and SATUC, that is the South Trade Union Coordinating Council. This webinar that will go on for the next 90 minutes is the first in a series of webinars that are being organized by GAWI, which is a global coalition of all African workers, including Africans on the continent and all workers of African descent in the African diaspora around the world. The aim of this series of webinars is to focus on global African workers and the impact of COVID-19 on us in the African world. We are painfully aware that COVID-19 has impacted on national economies, on livelihoods, and the world of work around the globe since the beginning of 2020. But we also know that COVID-19 has had a differentiated impact on people around the world, and that it has affected populations in different ways. For Africans and Blacks in the diaspora and on the continent, COVID-19 has had devastating impacts and exposed our vulnerabilities in public health delivery, work, livelihoods, and social protection. And it has done so in a way that we need to commonly review. GAWI's webinar series will focus on different regions of the world populated by Africans and place the spotlight on the impacts of COVID-19 workers there, as well as the responses that have emerged. Our first session today focuses on Southern Africa, in covering 14 countries on the continent and the impact of COVID-19 on workers, as well as their responses. We'll have some further remarks in this opening from our brother Terry Melvin, who is president of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists of the AFL-CIO of the USA, and who is also the convener of GAWI. And also comments from Comrade Singizwa Lozi, president of SATUC, at the same time also president of KUSA. Beyond these opening remarks, we'll then have a panel which will last 40 minutes. And we'll have that panel focus on what has actually happened in Southern Africa and the responses of workers. We'll have a presentation from our lead from LEDRIS, and then from the youth representative of SATUC, as well as the women's representative of SATUC. After that, we'll have 30 minutes of questions and answers, and then we'll have a closing remarks by our sister Mavis Kugusiche, who is Executive Secretary of SATUC. So without much ado, I'd like to welcome all of you to this webinar and to indicate that this session is being live streamed on Facebook and on YouTube, and it's also being recorded. And we take your participation in the webinar as a consent for you also to be recorded. Without much ado, I'd like to invite Reverend Terry Melvin, convener of GAWI, to give us some remarks. Terry, you have the floor. Terry, unmute and talk to us, please. Terry, you are muted.
Hi, this is Terry. I don't really understand what you want me to do. I'm just a guest on this meeting.
Whilst Terry tries to connect, maybe we can listen to Singiswa. If Terry, there was movement. Can you hear me? Please unmute.
I am unmuted.
Good afternoon. I think the Terry that you're referring to is Terrence Melvin.
Guy, unmute Terry, please.
I think you're referring to Terrence Melvin, Nopala, not the other Terry.
Yes, the Terry. I'm a guest here, so I'm not supposed to participate.
Okay, thank you, Kwasi. This technical difficulty that we were having, it appears that I was trying to unmute, but it kept telling me the host had to unmute me or allow me to unmute. So I think it was the confusion with the names of my other brother, Terry, that is on as a guest. Let me again say that I am Rev Terrence Melvin, who is the convener.
We can't hear you. Check your interpretation buttons.
Okay, hold on. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, finally, technology. You have to love it. Let me again start and say that I am Rev Terrence Melvin, the convener of the Global African Worker Institute, and I want to welcome all of my family and comrades from all over the world for joining us today. Workers today are facing some of the worst social, environmental, and economic conditions ever. African workers and those throughout the diaspora have suffered consequences of a greater magnitude than others throughout the globe. The pandemic has shown a bright and unforgiving light on the inequalities and injustices on which global capitalism is built, and has exposed how centuries of exploitation have left Africans the most vulnerable to the consequences. We have seen police brutality ravage the globe, from George Floyd in the United States to SARS in Nigeria. Law enforcement are being turned into agents of state repression instead of protectors of the civilians. COVID has exposed us a truly interconnected world, where what happens in China impacts Italy, impacts the United States, impacts Canada, and so on and so forth. In this interconnectedness, workers have realized that we are too low on the totem pole, that our death tolls are staggering. Our unemployment is disastrous, and the wealth gap is humongous. Comrades, sisters, and brothers, we can no longer operate within the bounds of our own borders. As workers, and especially workers of African and African descent, we need to stand arm in arm to fight global capitalism. In the face of this, labor leaders from all over the globe have joined to form what we call the Global African Worker Institute. Together, we are harnessing resources, focusing on key issues facing our communities, and strategizing to fight against the ever-looming cloud of oppression. Today, and as Kwasi said, and every week moving forward, we bring you the voices and experiences from different parts of Africa and the African diaspora. So we can be educated and informed of how our family are confronting and organizing against the many challenges we face. This web series is designed to convene Black workers nationally and globally, to check out our lay of the land and tend to ourselves, if you will, to share our best practices on the current fights that we're dealing with, and to create a space for Black innovation and strategy to build for the future. I want to thank ITCU Africa for agreeing to host the very first of this, our series of webinars. I also want to give a shout out to Brother Kwazi and Brother John Odo for agreeing to coordinate this very important discussion that we're going to have today. And I want to offer to you, as I come to a close, to use this as the beginning of a discussion that we can have globally, to put it in your calendar to join us weekly as we move across the globe and across the diaspora, to hear from brothers and sisters and comrades about how they're dealing with the issues that are facing all of us. So again, I want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy day to be a part of this great discussion that we are beginning on today. And I turn it back over to Brother Kwazi.
Thank you, Terry, for highlighting the fact that the Global Workers Institute is providing a framework for Black workers around the world to reach out to each other, and for announcing that for the next coming weeks, on every Thursday, we shall be focusing on one region or the other of African people. It is now my pleasure to invite our sister Singiswa Losi, President of SATUC, to give us some remarks. Singiswa, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, General Secretary. Greetings to all leaders across the globe. Indeed, as we stand today, the globe is still facing a huge health and economic challenge because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which now records over 21 million confirmed cases and over 1 million deaths. It is evident that COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the supply as well as the demand, meaning the production of goods and services as well as the consumption and investment.
Zingi, please take the floor.
Yes, all businesses.
Please help give Zingi access.
Yes, I think she's not on the right channel. She should be on the English channel.
Zingi, please go to language interpretation and pick English, and then close the original.
Okay.
Pick English.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Good. Now we can. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Brother Chris.
Yeah. Go on.
All right. Thank you so much. On behalf of SATU, and I want to greet everyone and also say that as we stand today, the globe is still facing a huge health and economic challenge because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which now records over 21 million confirmed cases and over 1 million deaths. It is evident that COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the supply, which is production of goods and services, as well as the demand, which is consumption and investments. All businesses, regardless of the size, in the SADC region and beyond, are still facing serious challenges, especially those in the aviation, in tourism, hospitality industries, with a real threat of significant declines in revenue, insolvency, and massive job losses. For instance, following travel bans, border closures, and quarantine measures that we have witnessed being implemented in the SADC region, many workers have not been able to move to their places of work or carry out with their jobs which has had a knock-on effects on income, particularly for informal and casual employed workers. Now, given the current environment of uncertainty and fear, enterprises are likely to delay investments, purchases of goods, and the hiring of workers. Now, it is for this reason that as SATUC, we welcome the GAU webinar series that are aimed at examining the situation of workers of African descent in the time of COVID-19 to enable us to learn from each other and map a way forward as trade unions. Now, we are particularly excited about the session today because it provides a platform for SATUC to share with the comrades across the world the findings and results of its recent study on COVID-19 pandemic and receive feedback from comrades. We therefore take this event as a preliminary activity ahead of a bigger event later this year, at which we shall officially launch the published report of the SATUC study on the impact of COVID-19 on workers, whose highlights will be presented and discussed in this session today. But with those few words, we really want to make an appreciation for providing us an opportunity, and we hope that we shall yield the results that we all hope for. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sengizwa Losi, and for giving us the privilege of an insight into the results of the SATUC study on COVID-19's impact on workers in Southern Africa. We now turn to panelists, and I'm going to be inviting our comrade Nyasha Muchiwa, who is a researcher at LEDRIS. LEDRIS is the Labor and Economic Development Research Institute of Zimbabwe, which is linked to the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions. So, Nyasha, tell us what the impact of COVID-19 has been on workers in Southern Africa. And we will be interested in hearing about the sectors which have been most affected, and also the implications for particularly the informal economy. But beyond that, we would also like to know what the responses of unions have been. So a quick overview, and I'll give you a time of 20 minutes to talk to us. Nyasha Muchiwa.
Thank you, Comrade Kwasi. I hope all of you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. I wanted to share the presentation, but it seems I'm disabled in terms of sharing. Can you allow me to share the presentation?
Yes, you're able to. Please, go ahead.
Yeah,
all right, thank you.
Now you can
it has been activated. Thank you. Thank you all for the opportunity to share with you the work that we have done as SATUC within the Southern African region. We conducted a study on the impact of COVID-19 on the working people in Southern Africa. And this is a snapshot of the results of the study that we undertook. I hope all of us can see the presentation.
Yes, we can see.
Great. So a little bit about the background. I think literature, we did a literature review which showed that COVID-19 is, my previous presenters have highlighted, was not just a health issue, but it became a socio-economic crisis at the global level. And the Southern African region was not spared from this. In terms of employment or in the labor impacts, the ILO estimated that in Africa, there was a decrease of 4.9%, which was equivalent to 19 million workers being affected by COVID-19. And this was early in the year when we were doing the study, and the figures now show that this has increased and this is also widened. What we have also seen is that in the labor market, this has been devastating for most workers, as most workers lost their jobs. Those in precarious employment, which as trade unions we've been fighting, were the worst affected. And there was loss of incomes and livelihoods for workers in the informal economy. As the SADC president highlighted, most due to the lockdowns, a lot of people were not able to be mobile, and workers in the informal economy need to be mobile to be able to earn a living and make a living. So they were heavily affected, and their livelihoods were also heavily affected. So the quick key questions that I will try to respond to: what has been the impact of COVID-19 on the working people in Southern Africa? And what are the implications of COVID-19 for the informal economy in Southern Africa? A report by the African Union estimated that nearly 2 million jobs, both in the formal and formal sector, were threatened with destruction. This was a report that came out early in the year, within the first quarter of the year, as they were reviewing what could be the possible impact of COVID-19. The ILO also gave out a report, since we are going to be looking at youth and looking at women. I thought it was important to include this, that the ILO also saw that 9 in every 6 young people would be out of work at the global level due to COVID-19, and this was also in May 2020. So this is what we have seen, what has become the new normal. Most of us are working from home, but for women, it has also come with more work to undertake in terms of also making sure that the children are in place, work has to be done, and everything else has to be in place as they are working from home. But what is also interesting and what we should also capture as we are moving and trying to make sure that there's ratification of ILO Convention 190, is that there's also been an increase. What we saw in the report is that there's been also an increase in gender-based violence, because now you've confined the victim and the perpetrator in one room, and they don't have space to move out. And we will see that some trade unions within Southern Africa have been working around this and trying to make sure that there is space that is created, safe space that protects women and young women from gender-based violence. For young people, the pandemic has amplified the challenges that young people are facing, which include an increase in insecurity, informality, and also the lack of social security or social protection that is available for them. So what we have seen, not only for young people per se, but also for workers in general, is that COVID-19 has further exposed and amplified the challenges that we as trade unions have been talking to in terms of security of employment, informality, and issues of the lack of social protection and social protection flows for workers within Africa and Southern Africa.
Don't come to me.
So what we also have seen is that this might also result in the increase of disproportionate suffering and social unrest, as the youth dividend is highly affected, and young people are going to face twice the levels of unemployment as before. What we have also noted is that young people also face multiple shocks. That is, there's been disruption in terms of education, in terms of training, in terms of online job learning, There's also been disruption in terms of employment and income. There have been income losses due to layoffs, due to reduced hours of work. In terms of reduced hours of work, as I go through the report, you will also see that there's also, at the same time, there's reduced hours of work, but there's also overtime in terms of more work being given to other workers who they have remained at work. So we'll give a discussion around that a little bit later. Also now, it has become very difficult for young people to find good quality or decent jobs. So the COVID pandemic has amplified those things. So the research that we did was carried out by SATUC, looked at the following countries: Angola, Botswana, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. It had 4 researchers, one from Zimbabwe, from Mozambique, from Botswana, and one was based in Namibia. So it was a team of 4 looking at all these countries, where we're looking at what is the impact on workers from a labor perspective. In terms of employment, what we saw was that there was stagnation in terms of job creation. New opportunities were very limited. What we also noticed was that there were pay reductions. Those who were lucky got pay reductions. Some even lost employment, and some even were not getting paid as they were working from home or were told not to report to work as part of the measures to address the spread of the COVID-19. As was asked, what are the sectors that were hardest hit by the pandemic? Tourism sector. What we saw is that within the tourism sector, a lot of people were laid off. Most hotels and tourist facilities were closed off. It is only now that they are reopening, but at very insignificant capacity levels, where they are accommodating less than what their capacity allows. So they are reeling from the COVID-19 impact. The informal economy, as I highlighted before, was highly affected. And what is important to note is that most of the people in the informal economy, most of the workers in the informal economy within Southern Africa, most of them are living on hand to mouth. So what it then means is that if they are not able to work for that day, they are not able to feed their families that day. So this sector or workers in this economy were highly affected and are still trying to pull out and reignite their businesses or their work for those that can still do that. The transport sector was also affected. The education sector was also affected. So these were the main 4 sectors that had the hardest impact due to the COVID-19 from the study that we carried out. In terms of job losses, we faced a challenge in that most unions had not quantified or collected data in terms of job losses. Those that had collected were from Zambia and also from South Africa. In Zambia, they estimated that by the time of the study, 70,000 jobs were lost. In South Africa, the estimates were around 1 million, and some reports were saying 3 million jobs will be lost due to the pandemic. We had a case in Botswana where retrenchment and dismissals due to COVID-19 were restricted by regulations. This was an intervention by government where they said no one should be dismissed or retrenched due to COVID-19. And the government provided a wage subsidy so as to cover this. So in terms of in excess of 90% of the respondents noted that there were wage reductions within the countries due to COVID-19, with a few saying no, which would be Botswana in a few cases. So in terms of wage reductions. We saw that some 75% cut. Some noted that, for example, in Mozambique, it was a 25% cut, then went to 50, went to 25, went to 75%. There was a reduction in working hours for some of the employees. Therefore, this was then used by employers as the reason and the result that led to a cut in wages. What we also discovered is that employers also noted that they were struggling to meet with their wage bills, especially in the hotel sector, in the tourism sector, because it was already closed off. There was no way of them to make incomes and make earnings. In some sectors, they reported that they were still earning 30%, but largely what we observed was that in most private sectors, you had reduced wages. It was only the public sector and a few big private companies that reported not cutting wages. So there was a rife in terms of wage theft, either workers not getting paid, workers not being paid on time, and also workers not getting paid in full and getting partial payments. It was only in the case of Botswana and Namibia that we noted that there were wage subsidies where government was chipping in terms of making sure that people got paid. In terms of social dialogue, as you see, the majority of the respondents at the country level, which are the federations, noted that they were participating in social dialogue on the impact of COVID-19 on the labor market. But what is important to note is that it is the quality of social dialogue that was the big question that we raised, to say, yes, you are participating in the social dialogue, but what is the quality of the social dialogue? So the quality came in question, where some noted that then it was more of, yes, there's this platform for us, that's a tripartite platform for us to dialogue. But what we are seeing is that some of the governments are making some decisions by themselves unilaterally. And some of the decisions that come out from the negotiations are not implemented in full or are not implemented at all. So as much as dialogue was happening, but the quality of the dialogue is what was the big question. In terms of social protection, what we noted from the study was that a lot of countries, in fact, all the countries initiated programs so as to try as much as possible to cover and protect workers against the impact of COVID-19. So there was a lot of social assistance as to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 and also the national lockdowns that were being implemented. But also, again, it was the issue of the quality and the quantum of the coverage that was being given. A quick calculation, you would see that governments were offering $4 to around $30 per household per month is social protection, is a way of protecting and assisting to mitigate. So if you are looking at $4 a day, the $4 a month for a household, it's really not much, and it's insignificant. In the case of Zimbabwe, what we also noted is that a lot of people were not even registering for these schemes because they highlighted that the cost of registering and participating in the scheme was outweighed by the amount of support and funds that you were going to get afterwards. So you would see that 50% of the affiliates responded that they were extremely dissatisfied with the interventions in terms of social security and social protection, with only a few, around 17%, noting that they were satisfied with the response that the government had given in terms of social security. But a key point that we noted is that the study affirmed that countries that have institutionalized social security, that rely on domestic resources, and that follow a rights-based or justice-based approach were swift to provide emergency assistance. So it also goes back to what the trade unions have always been lobbying for and the trade unions have always been fighting for in terms of the establishment of comprehensive social security or social protection flows within the different countries. Because it's very difficult to activate something that you don't have. If you don't have a social security or social protection system that works in your country, when a crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic comes through, it's very difficult for you to activate what is not there. So it still goes back to us as trade union to continue the fight and continue the work in terms of making sure that there's institutionalized social protection flows in our different countries. When we look at the fundamental right of workers, which is the fourth pillar, as we were looking at this, we were looking at using the 4 pillars of decent work, of the decent work agenda. There was suspension of legal strikes, the deterioration between labor relations and employer and employee relations, restrictions in terms of freedom of association, suspension of collective bargaining agreements, cancellation of wage increases. There were high risks in terms of health and safety as most frontline workers were not being provided the necessary protective clothing and protective equipment. There were long hours of work. As I highlighted before that, it seems to be there's like a contradiction where we say there were reduced hours of work and we are also talking about long hours of work. What we noted is that there were overall there were reduced hours of work for most workers, but for those workers that were then compelled to come to work, they would work for long hours. They would do multitasking, where in a department where 5 people were employed, 1 person had to come through and undertake the different tasks that were supposed to be carried out by the 5, because the company would say, this is the one that we are allowing to come to work. So for those people, they suffered long hours of work. Also for certain sectors, for workers who were allowed to work from home, I think all of you in here would agree with me that we have been also, due to working from home and online work and platform work also, we have been doing more hours at home than we normally do at the office. Because normally the office, 4:30, 5, you knock off. But if you are working from home, you are working 24/7. Anytime you can be responding to emails, you can be working on documents. So this has also been one of the biggest challenges. But what we also noticed, which was interesting, in the case of Zimbabwe, again, there was the labeling of the trade union, the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions, as a terrorist organization during the COVID-19, as they were speaking to issues of regulating and protecting workers against COVID-19, and the government also adhering to budgetary constraints and also providing and also fighting corruption. They were labeled a terrorist organization. So a lot of people speak to issues of opportunities, and this is what we also looked at, the opportunities that are emerging from the digital technology. Now that people can work from home, IT becomes key, issues of skills for soft skills and digital skills now needed and required more. As much as we looked at this, what we also noticed and what was important was that there was an estimation which was done, which said there were 230 million digital jobs that were in Africa, and that could be created by 2020. But filling them would require more than 650 more training opportunities to be created. So as the digital divide is what is then restraining most African countries and most African workers in taking advantage of the digital economy as per se. What you then note in terms of internet penetration, access to technology, Africa is still lagging behind the rest of the world. In terms of telephones, in terms of household with computers, in terms of household that have access to internet, not only is it like that, but it's also in terms of the cost of internet also. It's still very high, and the use of technology is still very low. So if you also tend to look at in terms of technology preparedness, Africa is still lagging behind, and a lot of work has to be done for us also to take advantage of the growth in the digital divide. So going forward, what we stated as a way forward in the report was the campaign on decent employment. This has to continue, because what as I noted, and as we noted in the report, is that due to the fact that already we were looking at workers within the region who were in precarious employment, the majority of them not being covered by social protection or any social insurance, the pandemic became the hardest blow on them. So there's need for us to continue to campaign for decent employment in the region. There's also need to strengthen the quality of social dialogue in the region. What is being discussed at the tripartite level, let it also be cascaded and let it also be implemented, so that there is a driven development agenda where people also feel they are part of it because they have contributed to it. The need to enhance social protection, as I highlighted before, there is need for most Southern African countries, in fact, most African countries, to establish social protection flows that ensure that they cover most workers. For example, workers in the informal economy in most countries are not covered by law, and that also creates a challenge. And if we look at social protection and if we look at issues of labor migration, what we also noticed is that a lot of countries were not covering labor migrants, especially those not formally employed, because it was noted that they, lack of a better word, there was an issue of nationalism around social protection. So you would get the labor migrants not being covered. And this also saw a lot of labor migrants then seeking assistance to travel back to their countries of origin because there was no coverage for them in terms of social security and social protection. Spoken to the issue of fundamental rights, this we cannot run away from, and this we need to continue to fight for in terms of the recognition of workers' rights as human rights, the recognition and the enshrinement of workers' rights in our national constitutions and also in the practices. Because what we have also seen is that there are countries that have institutionalized workers' rights in their national constitutions and labor acts. But what is missing now is the practice. There's need for us to continue the campaign in terms of the realization of workers' rights, the realization of a people-centered development trajectory in most of our countries. And also looking at the informal economy, most of our countries, the informal economy is the economy. But still, in terms of policy, in terms of programming, the informal economy is still being left out, is still being marginalized, whereas the majority of the people in our countries, the working people, are in the informal economy. As much as we are looking at issues of formalizing the informal economy, there is need also to recognize the informal economy and make sure that we have legislation, we have programs, we have initiatives that better the life of workers in the informal economy. I think this is one of the best ways to make sure that we formalize the informal economy, by recognizing them and by providing what is needed for them to work, and also recognizing that they are workers and they need protection in terms of social security. They need also platforms for social dialogue. They need also protection in terms of their rights at work. So in short, this is the summary of the research that was done by SATUC. As highlighted, the report is going to be published and launched. So thank you, Comrade Kwasi. This is where I end.
Thank you very much, Comrade Nasha. And I think clearly your study did not just identify the problems, but you have also pointed to what we should be doing to overcome what was revealed of our vulnerabilities. Shall we turn to the youth representative? Our comrade Runeso Chipam, who is the chairperson of the SATUC Youth Committee. Comrade, what do you want to tell us about the particular ways in which youth were affected, but even more importantly, how youth in Southern Africa have responded to the challenges posed by the pandemic? Comrade Runesu.
Yeah, thank you, Comrade Kwasi. I welcome you to start.
Yes, comrade.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Dear audience, I welcome you to this presentation by Samchuku. I also want to thank Nasha for such a wonderful presentation. It makes my task easier as I will not go into these conditions and other generic implications of COVID-19. What we negative economic growth, we understand that employers is what we call because it's cheaper so that actual affects you greater than other workers. We are also increasing for renewable emissions.
Hold on, Comrade Runesu. Hold on, Comrade Runesu. We can hardly hear you. Shall we perhaps listen to our sister whilst we try to see if something can be done about your connectivity, because nobody seems to be hearing you. I think there's a problem with the connectivity. So let's take Sister Angie Plete, who will speak to represent the Women Committee of SATUC, to tell us the particular ways in which women were affected and the responses. Already we heard about the escalation in gender-based violence and also particular challenges for domestic work. Sister Angie, if you can throw more light, shed more light on this, whilst Runeso, we try to fix the problem with Runeso's connection. Sister Angie.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Brother Kwasi. I'm not too sure if the host can be able to put my presentation.
Angie Petley.
Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Sister Angie, you're on the wrong channel. Yeah, you're on the
Can
wrong
you
channel.
hear me?
You have
Please
to
go the English
unmute.
channel.
Put the language, choose English, please. The language interpretation and choose English. That way we can hear you.
Am I audible?
Choose
Okay.
English, then mute the original video.
Yeah.
The original.
Good now.
Brother Kwasi, can I?
Angie, we can see you, but we can't.
You can hear me? Yeah.
Please go to the language interpretation and pick English.
Where? Okay, let me look for that. I don't see that. Where in this do I go?
We still can't hear you, Angie.
Yeah, you won't hear me because I'm not too
You
sure.
look for language interpretation and pick English.
Chat. I'm trying to search, but I can't find. Ooh, technology is dealing with me here.
Angie, you may find 3 dots depending on what you are using. You look for 3 dots, you press it, then you see a number of options. And then you see language interpretation as one of them.
It doesn't show.
GS, can you try moving to the original language so that you can hear her? Because some of us can hear her loud and clear.
So what channel is she using?
English.
Those who can hear her, what channel are you using?
Guys, I can't hear. I can't see what you're referring to.
Okay, so go on. It looks like some people can hear you, others cannot, but I think we are losing time. So go on, Angie.
Thank you, Brother Kwasi, and good afternoon to all participants in this. And really, we do appreciate the organizers of this important event. I'm going to request that if it's possible for someone, if the office have received my document, if they can put it on the screen, please. Okay, without that, let me take this opportunity to talk on behalf of Southern African women, which I will summarize the document that is already sent if I don't have it in front of me as we speak. As women in South African sphere or SADC as a whole, pandemic has affected us so much that it touched on the number of issues. That is the vulnerability of the women, exposure, the gender-based violence escalation, the deterioration of healthcare system towards the pandemic itself, increase of unemployment that brought an escalation also on around poverty. And on gender-based violence, it also affected the killings around women and girl children. We observed the job losses in March around that particular aspect. But I'll start firstly by talking to sectors that has been affected mainly, that the researcher has already touched base on, that is tourism sector, restaurants and catering sector in particular. But in general, migrant workers were mainly affected, as many of them, they find themselves more vulnerable without having places to stay, without employment, without any income, without anything that can make them to live under this sun. We observe the challenges that member states has created for women in particular, as they are the majority who are working from the sectors that I've mentioned. The timing of introduction of the work stoppage and the closing of borders on nearby countries, that in itself created challenges for women, especially on migrant labors. Now, here were the challenges. Those women find themselves without any salaries since the beginning of the pandemic itself and the state of disaster introduction by government around South Africa in particular. That caused everybody not to go closer to her own member states where she belonged. Then they could not go anywhere because the timing was also a concern for them to can be able to arrange their travelings back home. Now, government tried by all its means to ensure that there are stimulus packages around the workers can be given a stipend while they are at home. But the unfortunate part is that employers who employed mainly women did not pay the UIF. That created themselves a problem, created a problem for women not to can be paid out of the UIF, and they were left more vulnerable. That also created an increased, a huge human trafficking around those women who could not have PPEs, who could not have a place to sleep, who did not even have enough time, or they were not even allowed to can go to hospitals as and when they are infected or affected by the pandemic itself. Then we observed many job losses. We observed many deaths of people who could not be buried with the dignity that they deserved and who did not have any household. More of the people could not even have time to go and make groceries, as time was too little for them to can do that. Most workers around most women in that regard, they were infected during the travelings from to and fro, those who were given permission to go to work. But due to lack of safe traveling transport, they find themselves in a difficult situation as women, because majority of them will be raped, majority of them will be killed as they knock off late in the evening, with the police not being invisible to can assist in that regard. As and when they reaches their homes, also their counterparts are unemployed by that particular time. There's no income at home. Then the gender-based violence get escalated from that particular space. It increases in a way that poverty also increases. And unfortunately is that the state could not be able to assist the vulnerable workers who are migrant workers from time to time. But it's not only them. Even those who are locally based could not make it possible to make any means of living, as they were not receiving. The 350 in a month was not adequate, was not even sufficient for them to can have a living at all. We see the state has tried to increase the grant, old age grant, with 200 rand, which was still also not sufficient. Those who are unemployed, they were given the 350, which also was not sufficient due to this pandemic. We then see the child grant also, that was a little bit better, from 350 to 850, but still was not sufficient for women and children to can make a living out of that particular amount of money that they were receiving. So in general, we are saying women, we were disadvantaged by this pandemic, and it's still continuing. We are having massive retrenchments that we are calling here at home the Section 189, where COSATU had a march in trying to send a message to private sectors, to government, to ensure that no one should have a job loss. But unfortunately, the private sector is not prepared to listen to anyone. Dialogues has been taking place, yes, indeed. The research was very much accurate in relation to whether it was fruitful or not fruitful. It was 50-50. Somewhere we see that in other countries, especially in South Africa, they were managing to arrest some of the issues. But in countries like in Zimbabwe, you see farm workers more vulnerable, people who were supposed to work on the food security, going to bed without having any food for more than 1 day to 2 days, which was not sufficient. We are therefore calling that the SADC states should still come back to the table for dialogue against that. How best we assist women in ensuring that they are coming back to the economy, they are brought back and they are respected as humans. Their rights should be respected going forward. And my apologies to go hayway because I don't have my document with me. I was just using the scribble why I did at the beginning of this, as this was just conveyed to me late in the evening yesterday. With a lot of work, I tried to do what I could do. Thank you, Brother Kwasi, and everybody for listening to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sister Angie, for being able to stand in for our sister at such short notice. And my apologies for the initial hiccups with the connection. Now, our comrade Runesu, if your connection is better, we'll give you a few minutes to highlight the particular responses of youth. So, Comrade Runesu, try again and let's see whether we can hear you. In the meantime, those who want to pose questions should please put the questions on the chat so that we can transmit them to our panelists. Runesu, you have the floor.
Thank you for it. I hope I'm now coming loud and clear. Can you confirm that I'm now clear? Can someone confirm that I am now coming clear the site?
Can anybody hear Comrade Runesu?
No, we can.
It's not audible.
Comrade Runesu, on mute.
Any that are now coming up.
Unfortunately, we can't hear Comrade Runesu.
If I was coming to the comrades,
So perhaps we can move on to the question and answer session. And I see one question from Brother Chwaipi from Malawi, I believe, who is asking whether there are any case studies that could be referred to about the rise in gender-based violence across the region. Comrade Nyasha, Edward Chwaipi is asking a question whether there are any case studies that can be referred across the region or in specific countries.
They are.
On gender-based violence, the rise in gender-based violence.
Yes,
Whether
thank you,
there are any
Comrade.
specific studies.
Yes,
that we are aware
they are.
about.
Yes, can you hear me? Comrade Kwasi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Great. There are specific studies that have been done in terms of looking at issues of gender-based violence during the COVID period. And there are quite a number of statistics. And some of the statistics are they are incorporated in the report that we did. The beautiful thing about these case studies, they are also doing a comparison to say pre-COVID, what were the number of cases, and post-COVID, what are the number of cases that are happening. And some of the reports even give a detail in terms of there's some feedback from Runesu. Is it possible for him to mute? Okay. As I was saying, the case studies are there, and there is information and there is data, which also some of them have been tracking on a month-to-month basis to just find out what are the cases and the number of cases that are recorded. Okay. And also the beautiful part is that some of these are even recording the cases, GBV cases against men.
Okay, thank you. There's now a question about the youth subsidy and whether it is targeted at particular sectors or industries as a way of stimulating the economy. That's a question that is being posed also. The youth subsidy, whether it's targeted at specific sectors or industries as a way of stimulating the economy.
The subsidies that are being given are at the national level. It's only in a few cases where you get which are industry specific. but the ones that are there are at a national level, and they are trying to address the issues of employment as a whole. And it's in a few cases that you get which are specific to youth in terms of employment.
Thank you. Any other questions? I see a question about the rise in GBV, gender-based violence, and whether it could be a reaction to job losses. Any others? So we could pick a few questions and our comrade could respond to them. Please put your questions on the chat section.
Yes, Comrade Kwasi, there are two more questions. I think Nyasha can have those and respond to them, and then we take some more questions. There's a question on does the research have numbers of workers who have been retrenched, particularly from the Zimbabwe formal economy? How does the numbers relate to the decline of membership in trade unions?
Okay.
You were
Yes, Nyasha, do you want to address that?
Mark. Don't take it personally, Ringo. I don't. Just seen it before. Killing that many people takes a toll on a man. Even you, Sonny.
Nyasha, comrade, somebody is asking about figures on retrenchments. Is that right, babies? In especially
thank you. Okay, thank you. I was on mute. The host had not unmuted me.
Okay.
In terms of GBV, the cases have increased due to the first issue is that the confinement, where you have confined, as I said before, the victim and the perpetrator. So you get cases on the increase. Issues of the economic impact, where the discussion now in the house is what are we going to eat, and the male is also failing to provide. So those are some of the causes that we noted as increasing issues of GBV. In terms of the statistics, in terms of within Zimbabwe, I think we tried to find out the statistics from the trade unions, and we didn't get. What we got from only those two countries, those are the ones that I reported on, that gave us an estimate in terms of what were the job losses that they had recorded. So I think it also now comes back to trade unions as a whole to say, are we creating also enough, do we have enough database to track the developments in terms of job losses and job creation at a sectorial level, so that we can then aggregate this at the national level. So there's need for us to compile this information and make this information available. Yeah, I think I've covered the two questions that were asked.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then, Angie, I saw your hand up. Did you want to make a response? Otherwise, there are questions now about how transparent the distribution of the stimulus packages have been, on the one hand, and then another question is whether there has been any study on the impact of COVID-19 on persons with disabilities, considering that they are the most in the informal sector, and whether they have been finding their means to survive, since they were mainly dependent on others for movement. We heard about the lockdowns and its impact on informal economy operators. But beyond that, the question is about persons with disabilities. So that's one question. And the other one is on how transparent the distribution of the stimulus packages have been.
In terms of transparency of the distribution of the stimulus package, I think this has been one of the biggest challenges that we have noted. I think one of the biggest stimulus package that we can talk of is the one from South Africa, within Southern Africa. And it's still, in terms of the distribution of those funds, there's a lot of discussion around that. I think the last I checked, it was around 40% had only been distributed, and the rest had not been distributed in terms of stimulating the economy. And the distribution also on who was getting what and where and for what purposes was also not quite clear. I think Comrade Moyo, also from Zimbabwe, for example, in Zimbabwe, the distribution also has not been clear, also being driven by the fact that where the resources or the funds are coming from, most of them being loans through the bank and not being resources or funds held by government, then it makes it a little bit very difficult in terms of really accessing and really doing follow-ups on the distribution of those resources. In terms of any research on COVID-19 and the impact on persons living with disabilities, sadly, we didn't come across any study that was looking at that. And I think this is an area of research to look at what has been the impact to people living with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further questions or comments which we can read out to participants?
Comrade Kwasi, can I further emphasize on the question of stats around retrenchment?
Please, go ahead.
As Labour, we will not have stats that can say it ends here, because it continues every month as and when an employer feels that his or her profits are not made as expected, then they will send a letter for retrenchment. It's something that even if research can have a statistics as we said, they will keep on growing from month to month. But as and when those who may want to see the statistics, there is a statistics essay that covers across, and then they can from time to time look into it. In relation to what causes the gender-based violence is what earlier on was said. In the family, when the husband is not earning and the wife is earning, because there are those who are earning during this pandemic session, then their husbands, they are at home. That in itself increases the gender-based violence, because you cannot earn while I'm not earning, and you've got your own program that has been disrupted by the pandemic. And then the statistics emanates from the SAPS department in most of the countries that they should report from time to time account as to how far have they gone, taking cue from the beginning of the lockdowns up until now that are escalating. And that has grown massively, so to an extent where others are taking their anger to children if they are unable to reach to their mothers. Thank you, Brother Kwasi.
Thank you, Sister Angie. Any further questions? Otherwise, we'll say a very big thank you to our panelists, Sister Angie and Comrade Nyasha, and our sincerest apologies to Nesu for the inability technically to reach us. I'd like now to ask Sister Mavis Kugotite, Executive Secretary of SATUC, to give us some remarks towards the closing. Mavis.
Thank you very much, Comrade Kwasi. Thank you, all of you who have joined us this afternoon. I think, in short, we have seen from the presentation that governments have responded in several ways at the beginning of the pandemic, but there appears to be a lot of uncertainty regarding the scale and impact in the short, medium, and longer term of these interventions on labor and employment. There is no systematic work by the trade unions in the region to respond to this pandemic and its adverse impacts in Southern Africa and the SADC region as a whole. As trade unions, I think we have also seen, from the findings of the report, that we need to be a part of the responses at national and regional level. Therefore, as the current situation evolves, and we don't even know when we would be in a position to say that we have overcome COVID-19, there is a need for workers to stay attentive to the measures that impact on workers at the national and regional levels. The pandemic has amplified a number of challenges that workers generally, especially young workers, face more than how they've been dealing with those challenges before before the outbreak of the pandemic. There has been an increase in insecure jobs and informal work, as well as lack of social protection. It is for us as trade unions that when we look at the future of work, we must focus on harnessing the energies and productivity of a youthful age group from the formal age of work being around 15 to 64 years before people retire. And we need to lobby our governments to implement active labor market policies aimed at supporting enterprises and job retention. It means also that we need as trade unions to look at our organizing strategies to be able to recruit young workers. It is clear that functional social protection systems are critical for socioeconomic resilience. Occupational safety and health measures need to be enhanced as they are essential to decent work. And for us as trade unions, we need to make sure that our affiliates understand through the social dialogue and tripartite structures at a national level that they need to be a part of these discussions to ensure that our work environments are safe as people are beginning to go back to work from the various lockdowns that were instituted. We need to capacitate our affiliates, at national level for them to understand the processes that they need to follow in order to make sure that all the campaigns that we do and lobby efforts to put pressure on our governments to expedite and adopt the ratification and implementation of new protocols and conventions need to be amplified. We have seen, that there is a need for us to understand more of all the regulations or legal frameworks that we have in place and the ILO standards that we can leverage on in terms of making sure that there is adequate, protection for all workers in the region. We have seen that there are issues of labor migration. We've seen also a number of issues concerning cross-border drivers, and that they are also part of us. They are now essential. And therefore, those are areas in which trade unions ordinarily do not organize. And we must see ourselves as trade unions now as the main, play the main pivotal role in ensuring fair recruitment processes to curb abuse that happens to migrant workers, as well as combat human trafficking and child labor that might become rampant because of the pandemic. We also need to be proactive in making sure that we have policies in place that are geared towards ensuring that in future, when we have similar catastrophes and pandemics, then we have, we have a fallback, position, rather than to be left in limbo and unprepared, as it has shown at the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. For all workers in the region as well as in the continent and globally, we just want to emphasize on the need for collective action and to strengthen our solidarity and collaboration. We have seen, even with the short background and concept note on how when we work together and are united and make a concerted effort, as we have seen during the time when we rallied behind our brothers and sisters in the United States during the murder of our brother, and how our brothers and sisters in the diaspora are treated based on race and other discriminatory measures, that we can achieve a lot. And for instance, we have similar incidences happening even in the Southern Africa region. We have seen what happens in Zimbabwe. We see a lot of some of these riots and conflict rising from, between even us African people. We've seen issues of xenophobia, that we need to, really look inside and say, as African people, as African trade unions and workers worldwide, how do we put together, a systematic and consistent plan in terms of how we are going to approach these issues? Because, for as long as we do not have a coherent and proper action plan in terms of how we want to, what we want to achieve in the end, we may continue to work, in silos and not be able to achieve a lot that we can achieve if we work in consortium. With those short remarks, I just want to thank Brother Terrence Melvin. I just want to thank you, Comrade Kwasi, Brother John Oda. I don't see him today. I just want to thank also a number of our international cooperating partners. I've seen them joining us today. And the whole leadership of SATUC and other trade unions in the region, the members of SATUC Secretariat who work tirelessly to put together and logistics to host such events. I just want to thank also the technical and administrative team at ITUC Africa. Guy, I see what you've been doing technically to assist us, the interpreters. Thank you so much, everyone, for having joined us today. We hope that you can continue to join the other series of the webinars, because as Southern Africa, we're just kickstarting the discussions. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very, very much, Sister Mavis. And thank you all, dear friends, for joining this meeting. As we indicated at the beginning, GAWI, as a Global African Workers Institute, is providing a framework for African workers around the world to reach out to each other, to learn about each other's struggles, and also to create the basis for expressing the appropriate solidarity for our struggles around the world. So thank you very much for joining us. Next week, the webinar series will move to the Caribbean. So same time next week on Thursday, we invite you to join us. We'll be sending out the links to all of you who are in this meeting and to others who are not able to join us, so that we can continue informing ourselves about what is happening to Africans around the world in the time of COVID-19, so that it can help shape our responses in our way forward. Thank you all for joining us, and good night.